I asked Pastor Blake to lead the prayer today because I didn't want to be the one that was crying up front in front of you all. So I get to do a little bit of the lighthearted. I and a few friends have put together a top 10 list for you to enjoy the lighter side of things. And these are the top 10 things that probably happened on Pastor Marcy's last day in the office. Probably happened, yes. And, I just want to mention some of them are funnier than others, and so the ones that are especially funny, those are mine. Anyway. So on her first day in office, number 10, staff meeting taken up with scanning the church directory for a yellow wardrobe in search of a fitting replacement to greet on Sabbath morning. Also, number 9, betting pool starts to guess which Bible character Pastor Marcy will portray for her first sermon at the new church. Yes. Number 8, Pastor Blake receives more cards than Marcy, sympathy cards, for being the lone remaining Mac user in the office. Number 7, random people stopping in to drop hints. I think this probably actually happened about almond bark and Christmas time? You get that? Yeah, all right. Number 6, Pastor Marcy finalizing a color-coded, user-friendly org chart for the next 5 years in an 11th hour effort to keep Pastor Jim and Blake afloat. Number 5, Ken caught sneaking into the office to repair the computer in one last covert tech op. I don't know. If you know Ken, you know that's his thing. Fly under the radar, get it done. Number 4, Annette, seen shaking her head at the realization that No Shave November will now have 100% pastor participation. Yeah, there we go. Number 3, things that probably happened on Pastor Marcy's last day in the office. Number 3 is Ken overheard asking if rumors are true that pretty redhead, what's-her-name, might come see him again after all these years. Number 2, Pastor Blake seen measuring her desk space for a foosball table. Maybe that should have been number 1. And number 1, Pastor Marcy scrambling for more book boxes as a stream of conscience-smitten people return books that they borrowed sometime after the Reagan administration. That's a lot of fun, and it just reminds me, as I was going through that list, it just reminded me of how much Pastor Marcy and Ken have been involved in. And today, as I was thinking of the topic for the sermon and planning ahead, because I usually do that, even without the org chart, I thought mission. Obviously, personal mission would be a fitting way to honor both Ken and Marcy. Because 30 years spent in the same place making a difference in various ways as a church develops through different phases, that's incredible. And 14 years spent as pastor here, educated through seminary, but volunteering as a gift for 14 years to the mission and ministry of this church. That's incredible. That's incredible. And so as we're about to dig into that topic a little bit, let's pray together. Almighty God, we come to you today asking for your Spirit to fill this place, but also with a keen awareness that the mission was for the whole world. You said, go into all the world, and that includes the area of North Cascade. And so as we send Ken and Marcy off to that mission field, and they continue their personal mission there, I pray that you'll speak to all of us about the meaning of mission and what it means to have that sense of something bigger than ourselves. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. As I talk about church mission, I think it's complicated. It's always been complicated. And my past experience with it was something like a baseball game. Is anyone out here a baseball fan? All right, I brought my favorite baseball bat. Okay, it's some years on that. And as I think of mission, I realize that my experience with church mission, and probably personal mission, if I'm honest with myself, is that it's been kind of sporadic, like watching a baseball game. I mean, a baseball game, the announcers, they really try, and I do like baseball. So all of you who said you like baseball, I'm not insulting you, not that much at least, but the announcers really try. You know? It's a 1-2 pitch, and it misses just an inch outside. That wasn't really exciting. He missed the mark, okay? You know, and then there's the high fly ball, and everybody knows it's just popped up, and somebody doesn't catch it at shortstop, but, you know, it's a high fly ball. Wow, he's going back, and he's under it, and he takes care of it. All right, so-and-so's up to bat. And as I think about baseball, I think it's a fitting representation of what my experience has been with mission, sporadic. But when it really gets exciting, oh, that's the moment that keeps you watching the game, right? I mean, that grand slam home run, I mean, that makes up for all of the excitement that never was for the rest of the innings of the game. You know, you walk a couple of batters, somebody else gets a single up the middle. It's you know, the bases are loaded, the pitcher's up to bat, and we're wishing it was the top of the lineup, but somehow that pitcher just swings as hard as he can, and it goes flying out just over the outfield fence, and it's all worth it. But what about the rest of the game? Is that the way we're to do mission? You know, and I think it's also a fitting metaphor for me because, honestly, mission is about getting a message out, at least in part, about who God is and that He cares for us, isn't He? Isn't it? And so I'm trying to get a message to the back row, and it goes something like this. Yeah, see? I did that on purpose. It goes something like that. Sometimes I hit it, and sometimes I don't. Huh. Not quite on the back row. 2 for 2? That's right. If I miss this one, I'm out. I can't even. That's a little better. We have our moments, and it's exciting when we do, and it goes somewhere, but it never quite gets there, does it? Huh. And I don't even know where these are going to go. Where are they going to hit? There we go. Wow. And so maybe we need a different sports metaphor. Here, Pastor Blake, why don't we give you the bat there? Maybe we need something more exciting, less sporadic, more like football. Is that good? Now, I know the baseball guys, those are the guys who kind of keep their sport under cover a little bit. I don't know why. Are you embarrassed? I don't know. But anyway. And then there are the football guys. They wear it on their shirts. They wear it on their sleeves. They wear it on their faces. It's on their cars. It's these big blow-up guys in their front yards. Yeah. And the difference between baseball and football is that football is exciting most of the time. I mean, people are getting hit. They're flying across the field. Even if you made no yards, you know, somebody breaks an arm. That's cool. You don't break arms in baseball very often. And if you do, it's because you did something stupid. So football, maybe it's like football. But I've been in the experience of trying to do personal mission and church mission, both like a football game, where it's all go, 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 go all the time. And do you know how long football players last in their profession? I don't know exactly, but it's a lot less than baseball players. There's good reason. You just can't sustain it. And so maybe it's soccer. You know, at least if you get on goalie, you might not have too much action, but there's a lot going on the field. What was that? I'll put it down. Sorry. All right. What should I? You want me to kick it to you? I can't kick it to you. I'll miss. All right. I know. It was not a very impressive thing. Thanks. Participation ribbon. Yeah, you hashtag that. Good. But seriously, I realize that this is how I have approached mission in my life. By contrast, we see something very different. I'll try not to pick on you guys too much, but Pastor Ken and Marcy are really, Pastor Marcy and Ken. I said that wrong. Did I say that wrong before too? Okay. Pastor Marcy and Ken are the counterexample to this. I mean, like 3 decades consistently doing mission. Consistency. It feels to me like we want to rally, and it's either like baseball, where occasionally it sort of happens and we shoot off into the distance and we might or might not hit anything, or it's like football and we do it for a while and we burn ourselves out, or soccer and somewhere in between, and maybe sports analogies are just not the right ones. Maybe, just maybe, there's an analogy in the Bible that actually gets us to healthy personal mission, healthy corporate mission. And I think there is. You see here a grapevine, and you see some grapes, and we're going to go to John 15 in just a few minutes. But we're not going there quite yet. Over the last couple of weeks, I've shared with you the idea that salvation is about 3 big pieces being restored. You go back to Genesis and you see how at the beginning the spiritual connection was solid. God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, meeting with human beings, and there was no brokenness in that relationship. You see the social connection, it seems very beautiful between man and wife, and they don't have anyone else to complicate it yet. And then you see that mission where God says, take this planet that I just created, and you get to rule it. Rule over it and subdue it. Wow. And then as soon as they depart from God's way, God goes walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they're afraid, so they hid. Spiritual connection broken. Then God questions them, and they blame each other, or the man blames the woman, and you see that going badly. The woman's supposed to desire her husband, and he's going to rule over her, and it gets messy. And then, mission. Instead of ruling the planet, we soon find that they're afraid of the animals, and in the sweat of their brow, they work the ground, and it produces thistles. And so the whole story of salvation is about restoring these 3 things. And we talked about the social, and we talked about the spiritual, and today we talk about the missional. And as we trace that story through Scripture, it's fascinating to see that God, when he speaks to Noah right after the flood, he says the same sort of thing. Repopulate the earth, take over. I want to give you purpose back. I want to give you a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Sadly, you might have read the story, and Noah didn't get out of bed in the morning. Instead, he drank too much wine, and it was embarrassing, and it was just a mess. And then after Noah, who was next? Was there Abraham? And again, it was this global mission, the same thing. And then after that, who else was it? It was Moses, was somewhere in there, right? And again, it was this global mission. You'll be a nation of priests and kings to the whole world. We're going to take over this world in the name of God again. And then Jesus stands on that Mount of Olives and he says, go into all the world and preach the gospel, right? You see, the whole story of salvation has those 3 pieces, and one of those pieces is to give us purpose. So I want to ask you something. When you woke up Monday morning, what pulled you out of bed? Was it a sense of life purpose? Was it the alarm clock? Was it fear of getting fired? Tuesday, what pulled you out of bed? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Well, this morning I know it was because you wanted to come to church and hear me preach, but life isn't really about that either, is it? You see, we have to have a purpose, and God knows this, And so his goal for us is to restore that sense of purpose, that personal mission. And I want to tell you something. It's not the sort of something that you might expect from me, but I want to make a distinction. Your personal mission is the primary calling. If ever you hear a pastor, probably not me, but a pastor or a church leader inviting you to get involved in the church in order to support the church, we've got it backwards. We have a church so that we can support you in carrying forward your personal mission. God has gifted you. He has called you. And so, more than the church, this message today is about you and your personal sense of calling. What gets you out of bed in the morning? And so as we trace that story, I want you to jot these down if you're a sort of person that takes notes. I won't look them all up, but as we look at the story of how that personal mission developed in the New Testament church, it's fascinating there too. Jesus stood on the Mount of Olives there with his disciples, and in Acts chapter 1, verses 1 through 8, he tells them again to go to the whole world and preach the gospel, take this whole thing over in my name. And it's to the apostles that he speaks, and those apostles, their primary calling, by definition of the term apostle, it comes from the Greek word apostolos, same word, was to go out and break new ground for the gospel. That was their job description. And he says, don't do anything until you receive the Spirit. You can't do this until you receive the Spirit. But once you do, boy, oh boy, do that. And as the Spirit shaped the church, he also recognized that there was something else that was needed. The immediate result of the Spirit's falling on the church, you see that in chapter 2 of Acts especially, was that they began to care for each other. Social life was restored. There was a healing that began to occur between human beings as God was piecing this human family back together. And so that starts to break down in chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. They deal with that issue. Some of the widows are not being taken care of. At least the Greek leaders believe that. And so the solution is to establish a core of 7 men full of the Spirit to take care of that, social care. And from that we get the deacons. And then in chapter 14, verse 23, we find an example of a third type of leader that develops in that mission. And it's elders. As the apostles, whose job it was to go all around the world and to continue to spread the gospel from place to place, as they were leaving some of those places, they said to themselves, or perhaps more likely, the Spirit said to them, these people need some spiritual guidance. And so they appointed elders to provide that spiritual guidance within those places. And so as we look at the story, we once again see what 3 things? We see the spiritual in terms of the elders, right, being restored. We see the social in terms of what type of leader? The deacons, right? And we see the missional in those original 12 apostles, or actually 11 apostles, the original apostles. You see, I hope you're somewhat convinced, or at least entertaining the possibility that the story is really about those 3 things. I know there's a lot more detail and expands on those things, but it's the spiritual connection with God. It's the social connection with each other, a deep relational bond, and it's the missional. Missional. What am I going to do to make a difference in this world? What is it that's going to get me up out of bed in the morning? What is it that's going to help me feel truly alive? Where are my gifts, my passions? What's going to put me there? That's the missional. You know, I've been throwing the word missional around for a while now, and I want to make a definition of that for you. You see, missional, a mission trip. Tell me what's a mission trip. Because I want to make a contrast here. What does a mission trip look like? Well, let's say short term. Yeah. All right. And I like where you're going with that, but that's not where I was going. Just kidding. Yeah. No, absolutely. The example that Wayne is giving me now is where I'm going next. But a short-term mission trip, we do a mission. We go off to maybe Belize, and we do a project, and then we come home, and it's done. We do that on a local church level, too. We do an evangelistic series. We preach the gospel, and we share some things from prophecy that are relevant to our time, and then we rally, and then we stop. It's like that sporadic baseball metaphor again. And then we stop for a while. Missional is a word that was coined to describe a way of life, where it's not the sporadic sort of rally moment and then we take a break. And it's not that overly intense football game where we just can only do it so long and then we burn out. It's a healthy pace of living life in this way, like Wayne says, relationship with your neighbor. Yeah. So I want to invite you to John chapter 12. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. This is one of those weeks where I just spent a bit more time in the Greek, and I wish I could tell all of it to you, but it's fun. It's cool. Jesus is talking, and it's one of those times where it's in that Last Supper frame. I don't know if he's still sitting at the table talking to them or if they've wandered up toward the Mount of Olives. Perhaps they're passing a vineyard, and here he begins to talk about grapevines. And it's in this conversation that we find the metaphor that I think, that the word picture that I think will tell us how personal mission and therefore corporate mission should happen. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit, so they will produce more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given to you. So, this grapevine, for example, I bought it at one of the fine establishments in town. When Jesus says that he is the vine, he's talking about this main stalk. He says, this is me. And through that main stalk, if you've ever kept grapes, has anyone kept grapes before? There's an incredible amount of sap that comes up through that. If in the springtime you cut off a few branches, they just almost pour out that sap. It's an abundant source of everything that those branches need. It says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. And then he says he would do two things. He says the Father is the vine dresser, and the Father will cut off those branches that don't bear fruit, right? That's one thing that he says there. Cut off the branches that don't bear fruit. Now he's talking about us, and as I cut off some of these branches, does it make you feel nervous? What does that mean? Cut off the branches that don't bear fruit. All right? But he says another thing, and I would rather think that one applies to me. He says, I will prune. The Greek word is actually kathartizo. You might recognize it from some English words, like cathartic. What does that mean? It means to cleanse, right? So another thing he does, he cuts off the ones that don't bear fruit, but the ones that do bear fruit, he still prunes them. There are still some things that need to come off of those vines, and he describes that as cleaning them. Is it possible that Jesus, when he put this metaphor out there, was thinking that there might be some things in our lives that would need to be removed for us to be able to carry forward our personal purpose in life? And that he wanted us to understand it in terms of something that, yes, might be painful, but was very good for us? I think he did. I think that's what he meant. And so there are some that need to come off. You see, a grapevine, and some of you know more about this than I do, but a grapevine has several different, well, see, that one's just rotten. There we go. Get rid of that. a grapevine has this main stalk, and then there are some branches that are maintained, and off of those branches, little shoots come off. And shoots from last year are usually the ones that produce grapes the following year. But once they've produced grapes that following year, those need to be cleaned off because they're just taking sap. They're not doing any good. And they're preventing that particular branch from producing as much fruit or as high a quality fruit as it could if those things were taken out of the way. Interesting. I think you can start to see some real spiritual metaphors in that. And so he goes and he cuts those pieces off. As I'm talking, I'm hoping you're thinking about your personal mission. We've said that there is the spiritual, and some of you are definitely called to help connect other people more deeply with God. And I think some of you know that. This is my calling. We've talked about the social, and I know that some of you are definitely called, I see some of your faces out here, to help connect people with people. Well, that's part of what God is doing to restore humans in this world as well. So that's a crucial piece. And I hope that as I'm sharing this with you, you are beginning to ask yourself, what does he want to prune off so that I can be more about my purpose? Okay, that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping. And because I really hate to be hypocritical, I'm forced to think of that myself. And it's good for me. It's real good for me. But as I think about that myself, it's also clear that I'll have to give up some things that I really like. I really like that little twig. It's all alive and fun. But as long as it's not giving life to my personal mission, it's taking life from my personal mission. You see what I mean? And so there we have it. For you, maybe it's the social or the spiritual. Maybe it's the social. Maybe it's the missional. But there's another thing in the text that I want you to contemplate with me, and it's the aspect of bearing fruit. Because the whole purpose of the vine is to provide source of life to the branches so that those branches can bear fruit, right? Well, what about that fruit? What does it mean that we're bearing fruit? Verse 4. He says, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you, for a branch cannot produce fruit if it is not severed from the vine, and you cannot be faithful unless you remain in me." There's that spiritual connection again. "Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me and my words in you, you may ask for anything you want, and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love." That relational connection, it goes back to that. "When you obey my commands, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commands and remain in his love." It's a lot about love here. "I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy." Interesting. Filled with joy. "Yes, your joy will overflow. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you." To the question of what the fruit is, I puzzled long and hard over this, and I looked at John chapter 4, where Jesus talks about the fruit of the field, fruit in the loose sense, as being the harvest of souls. And so I said, well, it's missional, definitely missional. And I think it is. But Jesus here also talks a lot about love. And he talks about joy. And in the previous chapter, he talked about peace. And when you think of love, joy, peace, what do you think of? Absolutely. The fruits of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit, Paul writes in Galatians 5, are love, joy, peace. He got this from Jesus. And he's saying, I want to shape you in a way that brings joy and peace? Really? You mean you don't just want me to work for you, God, and accomplish things so that I don't get in trouble because I didn't bear fruit? No. He wants to bring joy and peace, and that's why he calls us. That's why he gives us back that purpose that sin has damaged in us, because he wants joy and peace. But what is the fruit? Well, again, I thought it was mission. It was about bearing fruit, reproducing. And I think it is. But I think that there's actually two kinds of fruit, at least, that Jesus implies. Because he talks a lot about love. As he's talking about bearing fruit, he then goes on and returns to that picture of love. And he also talks about joy. He talks about the fruits of the Spirit. And so the two types of fruit, I think, are character and mission. Does that make sense? And I think Jesus doesn't bother to distinguish between them very clearly, because in Jesus' mind, bearing fruit is the total consummation, the conclusion, the growth, the fruit of what it means to be a Christian. Character, mission, spiritual connection, it's all there. And so as you think about your personal mission today, and how that might or might not connect with this local body, I want to encourage you to think of it in terms of what God is doing to give you joy and peace and love and purpose and ultimately just joy. There's a card in your bulletin, if you received one on your way in. It's a strip of paper, about long and skinny. And on the back of that, it has some options. And they're about those three pieces: the social, the spiritual, the social, and the missional. And without a connection to God, we can't bear fruit in any of those areas. But as long as we stay connected to the vine, he will not only tell us what kind of fruit he wants us to bear, but he'll make sure that we can. And so that's the call. And for Pastor Marcy and Ken, as you join us a little bit later and we have an opportunity to put you on the spot and embarrass you a little bit more one last time, I just want to share with you and remind you of the fact that Jesus said, go into all the world, and I have full confidence that you will continue to go into all the world, in this particular part, North Cascade, and continue to bear fruit as you have here. Thank you for your ministry here. And thank you for being an example to us as we contemplate our personal mission today. God bless.